Bob Stoops is excited about Kevin Wilson. So should we be.
You are Locked On Sooners, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma Sooners. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Sooner Nation? Welcome to Locked On Sooners, and thank you for making Locked On Sooners your first listen every single day. Shout out to all the everydayers out there. Tune in and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Jay, one of the bigger stories of the last week was the Oklahoma Sooners reuniting with former offensive coordinator Kevin Wilson, who was the head coach at Indiana, then the offensive coordinator at Ohio State, and then the head coach at Tulsa, been around the block. Now he's back in Norman, and the Godfather himself, Bob Stoops, spoke on Kevin Wilson. He says, I think it's great. I love Kevin Wilson. Everybody knows the 9 years he spent with us. I think the last 5 or 6, he was the offensive coordinator, set records with Sam Bradford. I guess it would have been in 2008. Last 5 games of the year, over 60 points. He's got great experience, easy to work with, really smart guy. He'd be an asset to anybody, for anybody to have in their building. Jay, what are your thoughts on what Bob Stoops had to say?
I mean, he's 100% right. And that's actually the thing that we raved about here, John, when it came to bringing in a mind like a Kevin Wilson. You're not bringing him in to replace anybody. You're not bringing him in to take over a job. You're bringing him to help and enhance everything that's going on in your room. And again, this is what Nick Saban did. This is what the greats do. They bring in say this, Brent Venables can start his own rehabilitation system here at Oklahoma, right? The school for the wayward coach. He can bring in any of these head coaches that get fired, have them come in and just help see everything from a different perspective, have new set of eyes on what they're trying to do. And then hopefully they can execute off of that and get some W's from it. But Bob knows, I mean, of course, Bob's going to rave about it because, Kevin Wilson is Bob's guy. He was here at Oklahoma for 8 years underneath Bob Stoops in some capacity, from co-OC to the only OC. And he did do some special stuff here. That was in the early 2000s. Now he'll have an opportunity to help another young, innovative mind in Ben Arbuckle to go out there and be successful here in the SEC.
When you think about all the guys that came out from underneath Kevin Wilson as offensive coordinators, Kevin Sumlin and what he was able to do at Texas A&M, Josh Heupel and what he's been doing first at Oklahoma and then at UCF, now at Tennessee. There's just something about the guys that come out from underneath Kevin Wilson that have a lot of success. And bringing a guy like that back into your room is only going to help you develop your assistants. It's going to help develop your program in a way. And who knows how long he'll be with Oklahoma, because those analysts don't always stay analysts for a long time, especially a guy like Kevin Wilson, but somebody who has been around college football for a really, really long time. He's been a head coach. Yep. He's going to help Brent Venables from we talked about it the other day, just the game management perspective. And I think just being another set of eyes on what's going on the offensive side of the ball while Brent Venables is doing his thing with the defense, right? Because you're going to see you're going to practice separately. And so Brent Venables isn't going to be able to have his eyes on the offense maybe as much as he's had in the previous few years, but he's got a guy that he trusts, that knows offensive football, to be able to not so much keep an eye on Ben Arbuckle, but at least be Brent Venables' eyes and ears and understand what Brent Venables is trying to accomplish and be able to kind of keep the message the same. At the same time, Ben Arbuckle is making a step up from Washington State to the SEC. And True. You need to get your offensive line back in order. You got to get your tight ends playing much better ball than what they have the last couple of years. Kevin Wilson, I think, can help all of that.
Oh, no, 100%. And Kevin Wilson is a quarterback coach too, right? So he has a good knack for that. Again, he was there helping with a couple of Heisman Trophy quarterbacks that we had at Oklahoma in the early 2000s. And so because of that, you're looking at a situation where you got a guy that Ben Arbuckle, John Kuzieski, the other assistant quarterback coach, they've got another brain to pick when it comes to certain things, right? They can ask questions for like John Mateer, right? They can do this to be like, okay, John has a tendency of, throwing deep interceptions. His decision making and some of that stuff could be a problem. They can help with, breaking that down and understanding where those issues could be and then fix them. So I like the idea of Kevin Wilson really working closely with Ben Arbuckle and them. But he also could end up doing the exact same thing that Kevin Johns did when he was here and just be an advanced scout for Brent Venables on the defensive side of the ball. The man knows offenses, and he understands how other teams run. He can break a lot of this stuff down and help the defense get even better. No matter what, they're going to have that dude busy. I don't see – this is probably the one time I think that an analyst will come in and he probably won't try to leave anytime soon. I mean, Kevin is getting old. So he may be at the point where he's just like, yeah, let me go ahead and just kind of chill. I got a good buyout from Tulsa. I'll come here and I'll just, have a retirement job. Work when I feel like it, however many hours that I want to. But he'll probably be heavily engaged in helping with truly game planning. And so I don't think this hinders anything with Ben Arbuckle, but it does nothing but enhance because it gives an extra body. And that's kind of where, Bob Stoops was going with that. He's one of those minds that it makes sense to allow him to be in there. Again, this is exactly, if you go back and look at what Nick Saban was doing as his tenure was progressing at Alabama, he just started taking in those wayward coaches that would get fired, bring them in, rehab them up. Some of the younger ones would get new jobs, or he would, kick some of the younger ones out and say, hey, I need somebody else because it's not working. But it gave him a revolving door of talent and minds that he can leverage. And at some point, he found the ones that could stick. But he did go through a lot of OCs. Brent Venables may see something similar, especially if Ben Arbuckle sees success.
Because we've talked about it before, you don't really see somebody on the offensive side of the ball that can be the heir apparent if Ben Arbuckle were to get a head coaching job somewhere else after one or two seasons. There's not somebody that you look to and you're like, yeah, that guy's a future offensive coordinator. That guy is. And so it gives you a little bit of insurance having Kevin Wilson in the room. And I know people are going to make the comparisons to Seth Luttrell. At the same time, Kevin Wilson's got a lot of skins on the wall as an offensive play caller over the last 20 plus years. He's helped get a team to a national title game. He's helped Ohio State. I mean, a big-time Ohio State program go be very, very successful, both under Urban Meyer and under Ryan Day. So I'm not concerned about it. If the plan is, hey, this is the guy that's going to take over if Ben Arbuckle leaves after 1 year or 2 years to go take a head coaching job somewhere, and Kevin Wilson is the answer to the offensive coordinator situation, because he's a name that a lot of people were throwing out there as, hey, let's bring Kevin Wilson back from Tulsa and let's make him the offensive coordinator. There were a lot of people that were throwing that out there as Oklahoma was looking for an offensive coordinator. So it wouldn't surprise me if that's the long-term plan. You got to have short-term and long-term plans. Right now, you got to get your offense fixed. Ben Arbuckle is the answer to that. Kevin Wilson is here to supplement all that. And again, I think his experience developing players at multiple positions is only going to help enhance what your assistants have been doing, or in a way haven't been doing. And so you got to get better in some of those ways, in particular at tight end and along the offensive line. Speaking of that Arbuckle hire, it was considered one of the best offensive coordinator hires of the offseason. We'll discuss coming up next here on Locked On Sooners. This is a message from sponsor Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was dealing with piles of paperwork and frustrating forms, and then waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back. Now Taxes is easily uploading your forms to a TurboTax expert who's matched to your unique tax situation. An expert who's backed by the latest technology, which cross-checks millions of data points for 100% accuracy. While they work on your taxes, you get real-time updates on their progress, and you get the most money back guaranteed, all while you go about your day. No stressing, no worrying, no waiting. Now this is Taxes Intuit TurboTax. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Thanks again for making Locked On Sooners your first listen every single day. Shout out to all the everydayers out there. Tune in and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. We're free and available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button and that notification bell to let you know when new episodes drop. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So Ben Arbuckle was a big-time hire by the Oklahoma Sooners. He is a highly regarded offensive coordinator from his time at Washington State, but even dating back to his time at Western Kentucky. And Corey Nagel of 247 Sports ranked the top 10 best coordinator hires, not just offense, but both defense and offense, coordinator hires of the offseason, and Ben Arbuckle came in at number 9. Here's what he had to say. Now, Oklahoma is banking on Venables making the right hire in 29-year-old Ben Arbuckle from Washington State, getting transfer quarterback John Mateer in what essentially was a package deal is key to reigniting the Sooners offense for 2025. I liked where Arbuckle landed. You know, he's not going to be Jim Knowles. He's not going to be who was the guy that went from Notre Dame to he went to Cincinnati, but from Penn State to Clemson, there are a lot of really strong coordinator
Tom
moves.
Allen, yeah,
a lot of really strong coordinator moves around the country. Arbuckle making the jump from the Pac-2 to the SEC, still getting a lot of respect.
Yeah, and I feel like being a top 10 hire is a fair number for him to be. And number 9 is a fair area for him to be as well. I mean, he's not, like you said, Jim Knowles, which was probably the biggest hire in the offseason. Heck, even Gus Malzahn going to Florida State from being the head coach at UCF was a pretty massive pickup. But I actually like that spot as well, and I agree. The big deal of getting John Mateer to follow in a package deal was probably the one thing that put the icing on the cake for him to be able to be considered a top 10 hire, because that's what you needed. You needed to bring in not only a coach, but you need to bring in a quarterback that knows the system, at least for year one, for you to be able to actually see success quickly. Now, granted, I can see Ben Arbuckle making like Michael Hawkins into something special. Heck, he could be another Cam Ward underneath him, because we saw when Cam got underneath, Arbuckle and staff, he really started to show out. But you now don't have to wait and see what everybody else is going to look like with them. You've got the dude that's already put up numbers with them. And so, John, I think that's probably that to me is the reason why you would have him as a top 10 hire in that situation.
Well, I think with or without Mateer, I think he was one of the better coordinator hires of the offseason, because you've seen him put up big numbers both at Western Kentucky and then at Washington State. He's following that trajectory upward. Now it's just he has to go do it at Oklahoma to prove that it wasn't a flash in the pan at either of those two smaller schools. He's going to have to do it against SEC competition. We've seen this system work at a lot of places. I mean, you're seeing it at Texas Tech with Zach Kittley, right? He was a name that was on a lot of people's buzz lists and hot boards whenever the offensive coordinator position came open. They wanted to try and snatch him away from Texas Tech before he went and got a head coaching job. Yeah. It's a system that is going to create favorable matchups for your playmakers on offense, and that's why it's so successful. You bring in a guy like John Mateer who's got that experience in the system, and that just is the icing on the cake. Because now you're not having to develop somebody like you just mentioned. You've got a known quantity at quarterback, and it's a quality player. It's not just a okay player. You're hoping that he makes a jump. No, it's a really, really good player who's shown some really good things, and you're hoping he makes a jump. Now, was he perfect last year? Not at all, but you don't get to 44 total touchdowns by accident. You don't you don't have almost 4,000 combined yards by accident. I know some of those games were inefficient passing games, but he still put up big numbers. And yes, maybe against some lower level competition, but that's okay. We're expecting that with better talent around him, better coaching around him, that you see that jump happen. You see him make a big step forward to where he can help Oklahoma. Does Oklahoma have to go score 40 points a game for them to be a successful team next year? No, I don't think so. If they can score 30 to 35 points a game, they're winning 9-10 games, and they're going to be in the playoff.
I don't even think they got to even score 30 points, to be honest. I think about 25 to 28 is a safe number, because the defense showed last year they did enough to hold teams under 30 on a regular basis, and that's how you can win games. As long as you're not turning the ball over, that is. Right. I mean, if you're giving the ball up every other play, then sure, right, you're going to, you spot a team 21 points in the first 5 minutes of the game. Yeah, you're probably going to give up 30 in that game. But if Oklahoma can go out there and keep that defense about the same, which I think the defense is going to step up to another level this coming season. I think that the secondary is a little bit better in comparison with more experience. I think the linebacker room is going to be better. I think the defensive line is going to be much better than it was last season, and that's no shade to the guys that just left. I just think that the young players we have and the experience that they've grown with and some of the players we've added, I think the defense is going to step up. But if you at least add, like I said, up to about 25 points and just help the defense by keeping them off the field just a little bit, I agree with you. I see about 9 wins, maybe 10, because you could have probably snuck out 2 to 3 more wins last season if the offense was competent. That's what Ben Arbuckle is going to give you now. He's going to give you some competence. He's going to have to prove it, which we all are in the boat of. I need you to show me that you're going to be able to do this. Give me a playbook. Show me some creativity. I mean, I don't even mind you giving me a jet sweep as long as it's not going to a tight end. Give me some good plays that makes sense for the scenario. It may work sometimes it won't. That's just kind of the game itself. But John, as long as Mateer and Arbuckle shows us that they can get the wide receivers in line and get the offensive line comfortable, I think I'm good. And I think that he shows it to be a great hire.
Well, and having a guy with Mateer's experience gives you someone who's going to get rid of the ball. He's not going to hold it back there. And when he takes off to run, he's going to be really, really dynamic and effective. But I think him being able to play with guys like Dion Burks, who is a really good wide receiver, a healthy Jaden Gibson, who's a really good wide receiver, I think that's going to help improve his efficiency as well, because Dion Burks is a guy that can get open. We saw it in the first few weeks of the season last year. I mean, he was a catch machine. I mean, he wasn't putting up a ton of yardage, but he was catching a lot of balls for Oklahoma. It took until like week 11 or 12 before somebody else finally passed Dion Burks as the receptions leader on this team, because that's how many receptions he'd had in the first few weeks of the season before he got injured against Tennessee. So I'm looking forward to seeing how they're going to be able to get Dion Burks open in space. You throw in another guy like a Jacob Jordan or Isaiah Satania as that other slot guy when they're in 4 wide receiver sets, and I think the efficiency goes up for John Mateer, and you're going to get more explosives because you've got guys that are really, really good after the catch, in particular Burks and Satania. They can make people miss in the open field. So I think some of the things that, maybe John Mateer wasn't super efficient last year, you're going to see that efficiency increase with another year in Arbuckle's system and with improved talent around him, especially at wide receiver. So excited about that. I think, again, this Arbuckle hire, it's part of what's going to make or break the 2025 season for Oklahoma, and is going to be what makes or breaks Brent Venables' career at Oklahoma. But I think, and I feel pretty confident in saying that they got the right guy, so much so that I think that they're going to be a lot more competitive this next year. Whether they get to 9 wins or not, that's going to be the question, because it is a tough schedule. No doubt it's a tough schedule. But I think they're going to look a whole lot better. They're going to look like a team that's actually competent out there. They're not going to look like a team that has no idea what to do on offense.
That's the thing I'm curious to see, is just how competent can this offense look. Like, granted, watching Washington State, even when they played in the Apple Cup against Washington, playing, against some other competition, they look like a solid team. Can we get that same thing here at Oklahoma in the SEC? I think so. And, we've talked about this before. The competition is not going to be as grueling as everybody thinks, right? I mean, Mateer, they beat Texas Tech, they beat Washington. They ended up losing to, was it Boise State, but they didn't play just G5s the entire year. Most of the season, sure, but that Texas Tech and Washington win in back-to-back games, pretty big deal, in my personal opinion, for what you're trying to do. And Tech wasn't just god awful last year. They finished the year 8-5.
The one loss that stands out above all of them is that Wyoming loss at the end of the season, where they scored 13 points or something like that.
14, but yes.
But that was also, I think, around a time where maybe Arbuckle's name was starting to creep up in offensive coordinator hot boards and searches and things like that. And again, I don't know how soon the connection was made to Oklahoma, but it's hard to not consider that when something like that happens, when you don't have your best performance. It's kind of understandable sometimes if you have coaches that are thinking about other things, or players are worried that coaches are thinking about other things.
Yep.
And that's kind of what happens. Speaking of coaching, Oklahoma is going to have a big decision to make after another big time blowout loss to Florida. We'll discuss coming up next here on Locked On Sooners. Thanks again for making Locked On Sooners your first listen every single day. Shout out to all the everydayers out there for tuning in and subscribing to the show wherever you get your podcasts. The Oklahoma Sooners lost 85-62 to the number 2 Florida Gators on Tuesday night. And listen, it's the number 2 Florida Gators. They're really good at basketball. And I feel like Oklahoma was playing them decently defensively. Florida just can get up shots and they can hit shots. They're just a really good team. Losing by 23 sucks. It's terrible. Florida's really good. Oklahoma's not so good. That's going to happen. It's the 4th time in the last 5 games that Oklahoma lost by 18 or more. And man, Joe Castiglione, Joseph Harris have a big decision to make. And I think that decision is probably going to be an easy one.
Somebody need to be fired at this point. Why do you want to drag this out for the rest of the season? The Oklahoma schedule is not going to get any easier at all going forward. We talked about this last time, but their last 5 games, they've got 6 ranked teams. They got 5 ranked games, 4 ranked games in the next 5 games. The next 4 games in a row are ranked teams from Mississippi State, Kentucky, Ole Miss, and then Missouri. And then the end of the season is Texas, in which Porter is 0-7 against Texas in his career so far, which is also another, shame ringing the bell in this situation. So to me, it probably they're out of the tournament. Which go ahead and just say that. Yeah, I mean you've got some quad 1 wins, cool, but that's not going to help you be able to make it into the tournament. So unless they pull out a miracle and win like 3 of the next 5 games, which we know is not going to happen. You probably should go ahead and just fire him there at the tarmac now and, move on to something else.
Yeah, I mean, if Oklahoma has any chance of making the NCAA tournament, they've got to go at least 2-3 in their final 5. I think at least that. If you really want to solidify it, you got to go 3-2. And 3 of those wins have to be against ranked opponents.
Yep.
Or Texas. You got to beat Texas on the road. Like, I think that one would be significant enough. If you were able to win that one on the road and go 2-2 in your other games, that would move the needle, I think, with the committee. But you can't go 2-3. I mean, I don't think you can't go 1-4, even if it's a ranked win. You're not going to be able to afford that. And so I think the time is now. Like, if you want to salvage any part of this season when you're so close to making the tournament, you may or may not be able to make the tournament. You're out. Even if you fire him, you may not make it, but you might be able to kind of reignite some life into the program a little bit over the final 5 games. And if you do, then you're playing with house money. If you don't, you weren't going to make it anyway. So what's the point at this point of continuing to run out a guy who just hasn't inspired the program? In 4 seasons, we're at the same point that we were at the first year of Porter Moser's time here. We're still on the outside looking in of the NCAA tournament. And at Oklahoma, that should be fireable. You could go 1 season maybe, but you cannot go 4 seasons and not make the tournament. You can't go 3 seasons and not make the tournament. They probably should have made that move last year, but that buyout was so significant, upwards of $10 million at that point, that maybe that they just felt like, okay, it wasn't the right time to do that. Well, you're still looking at $7.5 million that you're going to have to pay Porter Moser in a buyout to move on from him. But it just doesn't work anymore. It's not working. Nothing's working. You can't rely on Jeremiah Fears to save you. You got to get some secondary scoring. This team is just not good enough. Porter Moser put the team together. Whether they're investing enough in basketball or not, it doesn't matter at this point. This is the head coach that you chose, and the head coach has put this team together. He's turned it over every season he's been here, every offseason he's been here, and they still can't put anything together, Jay. It's maddening to watch this team struggle to get a shot off. It's maddening to watch this team not be able to create a clean look or to run anything smoothly. And when they don't have their primary option, to watch them all just go into the tank and just stand there and watch. It's just not fun basketball to watch. And so while everybody wants to sit there and dog on the fans for not showing up, why would they? It's not an entertaining product. It's not a head coach that inspires confidence. Yes, you've got a potential lottery pick in Jeremiah Fears, but you don't have much else. I love Jalen Moore. I love that dude's game. But outside of those two guys, this team is just not built to entertain anybody. It's not built for excitement. This offensive system is not built for excitement. So I totally get why everybody's staying away.
I totally get it too. I mean, I know that a lot of teams a lot of fans in the SEC will, show up to games regardless of their team's winning or losing, if they're good or bad, just because, it means more. We'll get to that point. I think we'll get to that point. But the one thing that has to happen is basketball that actually looks like you care. That's kind of the most important thing. Like, not seeing much play call. The pass, pass it back and forth, go ISO, and hopefully get a score up, get a shot up. As many layups as we missed in this game when I was watching it, I was like, I got to turn this thing off. I was getting tired. Every time I looked up, it was just miss layup, miss throw at the goal, miss throw. Like, there was not very good shot selection. There wasn't even good plays to get people open. I mean, Fears was trying to figure it out basically by himself. He went 7 for 15 in the game, so it wasn't awful. 4 for 8 from 3, so he had a solid game for him as a true freshman. But if that's the only thing you got going in that game, you're not going to win any games in the SEC. The SEC is a very tough conference, especially in basketball this year. So we got a tough football conference and tough in basketball. What are we doing here? I think a new voice is needed, especially like you said, John. The fact that it'll be 4 years straight, no tournament bid. Yeah. It's time to move on.
Yeah, it's time. And I think Oklahoma, with their next hire, needs to swing for the fences. Yeah. I get there will be some really intriguing mid-major coaches that go on a run in the NCAA tournament, have a Cinderella season, a la Porter Moser at Loyola Chicago a few years back. But no, if you want to excite this fan base and energize it, you need to go for a name hire, and you need to find somebody that's having success right now that's going to reignite and re-energize this fan base. You can't go for a mid-major that nobody knows. You've got to go for a name, and you got to go for a big one, and you're going to have to figure out a way to find that money to go do that. And Joe, that's on you, man. I mean, I know a lot of people out there are not real pleased with the way things are going with Joe C. He's got a lot to prove right now as an AD, man. I think he does. Like, you can't live off the success that you had 20 years ago, 25 years ago. I mean, Patty Gasso is saving you right now. Outside of Patty Gasso and gymnastics, you don't really have a whole lot going for you. I think the Jenny Baranchik hire was great, but in recent years, that's about the only strong hire that he's made. The Brent Venables one is very much in question, and Porter Moser is going to be out the door in a few weeks, if not tomorrow.
We'll see. Hopefully they make the decision and get that bad boy done. They need just do it at the tarmac. Just let them know, hey, you won't be coaching here after this game. I think it's time for a new voice going into the last 5 games of the season. You never know. You may squeak out a couple of wins that helps you end up in the tournament. That probably would be nice.
You never know. Again, if you want to try to salvage a season, the best way to reignite a team is to make a change. It's the same thing that happens in hockey sometimes. You get down early and you're trying to find a new energy. You pull your goalie and see if that doesn't get your guys fired up and take them to another level. But we'll see what Oklahoma decides to do. And when they decide to do it, we'll discuss it here on Locked On Sooners. So make sure you're tuned in and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Follow Jay at Unfair Sports. Go check out his channel, Unfair Sports, over on YouTube. Follow me at John 9 Williams. You can read my work covering the Sooners over at SoonersWire.com. The show is at Locked On Sooners on all your favorite social media platforms. But until next time, he's Jay. I'm John. Boomer Sooner.